With this proof, I'm going to demonstrate the working backward strategy, which is the strategy that's outlined in 8C. So one way to think about the working backward strategy is that you're just reverse engineering the proof. You're saying, we wish we had C, because that's our desired conclusion. Let me write that down there. So we wish we had C, and so then our next question, what rule might allow us to derive that sentence, and with what ingredients? Now, when we look at what's in our proof so far, which is only premises at this point, C occurs in only one line. That's great for us right now because it narrows what we need to check out or what we need to investigate. One of our ingredients is most definitely going to be line 4. Now, the next question, or I guess it's actually sort of a combo question, is what rule and what extra ingredients might there be to actually get what we want? Looking at line 4, the thing to notice always are your main operators. Line 4 is a horseshoe. Additionally, notice that the sentence that we want occurs in the consequent position of that conditional. Well, that ends up being very handy for us because that's exactly the rule pattern modus ponens. In other words, if we had not A, then along with line 4 and modus ponens, we would get exactly what we wanted. In terms of the working backwards process, you take this information here and you go back to your proof. You look for not A. And if you have it, then you just write down what you want to derive, citing the ingredients that you have and the rule that you used on it. In our case, though, and usually this early on in a proof, when we go to look for what we wish we had, we don't have it. So this is kind of the next step in the working backwards process. We wish we had not A. Now, a quick big picture comment. As we learn more rules, as the proofs get harder, the working backwards strategy may not be as streamlined. I mean, you're going to see that we're just going to go from one wish we had to another wish we had, and it's going to just go in order, and we're going to discover our proof fairly straightforwardly. As proofs get more complex and we get more rule patterns, there may be more than one option. There may be more than one way to derive C. And you'll have to pursue each of those options. And this is where experience and practice, looking at a lot of proofs, can be helpful here because that's where you become more efficient. You become better able to look at the options and rule some out over others. But in our case, we've got it pretty straightforward. There's only one option. There's only one sentence that even had our conclusion in it to begin with. It's a conditional, and modus ponens is really the only option in terms of getting us what we want from line 4. We don't have not A, so that becomes another wish list sentence. And we ask us the same question. We ask the same question as before. What rule and what ingredients might get us not A? So you take a look at what we've got so far, and it's not going to be anything from line 4 because we are using not A with line 4. Well, line 1 is the only other line to look at this point. We don't have not A, but it's the only other occurrence of A in the proof so far. And the question is that combo question again, given the ingredient or ingredients that we do have and given what we want, what rule and what additional ingredients are going to get us what we want. Always identify main operators and pay attention to them. We have another conditional, great. And this time, the sentence that we want is a negation, of course, but it's the negation of the antecedent. Aha! Well, that's great news. Because if we only had the negation of the consequent, then MT would get us what we wanted. According to modus tollens, if you have a conditional and the negation of the consequent, then you can derive the negation of the antecedent. Oh, and actually, I jumped the gun with that question mark. I guess we didn't know for sure yet that we don't have not be. But, in the process, we figure out what ingredients, what rule might get us what we wanted, and we find that if we had not B, we could use modus tollens to get not A. We look at what we've got. Do we have not B anywhere? Well, no, we don't have it by itself, but it does show up in line 2. So then we say, well, we wish we had not B. And we ask ourselves, well, what rule and what ingredients might get us not B? Line 2 is a disjunction. And when we look at disjunctions, we find that, well, actually at the moment, we only have one rule anyway that lets us use disjunction, so it's most likely going to be DS here. But if we just follow through with the process, we see that the sentence that we want is an exact match for the left-hand disjunct. Now, quick Q&A. Why have I treated not B as a unit here, as a compound unit to be sure, but as a unit, whereas here I treated the not A as the negation of a simple sentence? And the answer is it depends on what's going on in your proof, what patterns are available to you, and the rule set. Because the other ingredient we were, or the other potential ingredient that we were checking out was A horseshoe B, then that's why it made sense to treat this as an A that was negated, because we were trying to use line 1. And modus tollens tells you that what you're deriving is the consequent with that negation added to it in front. That's what you're deriving. On the other hand, when we get to trying to get not B, the reason why it makes sense strategically to treat this as a unit is because in the disjunction that we think we're going to use, the rule pattern, the relevant rule pattern says that we're just deriving the left-hand side. We're not changing it at all. We're not adding a negation or taking a negation away. Now, because this was a relatively simple proof, we don't have options. But in more complex proofs, and as we move forward here, you're going to have to be open to treating not A as the negation of A, but also as the unit not A. It just depends on what else is going on in your proof and which rules are available to you and which rules you're trying to use. That is most certainly an added level of complexity. It's more stuff to keep track of for sure. But the way to get through it is know the rules. Second, gain experience with proofs. That means looking at answer keys, practicing with all the exercises in the book. The more proofs that you see, the more times that your brain works through these patterns, the faster it processes them. But in any case, now back to our proof, not B is the matching left-hand side of this disjunction, and the rule that gets us the matching left-hand side of the disjunction is indeed DS, and what we need to derive that matching left-hand side of the disjunction is the negation of the right-hand side. So if we had not D, then using DS we'd be able to derive not B. So we go back to what we have in our proof and we look for not D, and oh my gosh, we see that we have it. When that happens, in the big picture scheme of things, you may still not be done with your proof, but at the point where you have the ingredients that you need to use a rule on to get something that you want, go ahead and write it down. So that would be on lines 2 and 3, DS to get not B. And in this case, we are actually just able to wind our working backwards notes. We're able to sort of wind them back, and we'll be able to develop the proof. In a more complex working backwards situation, you might have some branching options. You may have some alternatives. You need to do a little bit more work before you're done with the proof. But in this case, we just copy over what basically the work that we did here, but in reverse order. So now we wanted not B because we wanted to use it with line 1 and MT. So that means we know what line not B is on it. Line 5 is not B. So now we write that down. 1 and 5 using modus tollens gets us not A. And why did we want not A? Oh, well, it was to use it along with line 4. So now we know where not A is. It occurs at line 6. So we just write that down. Lines 4 and 6 and modus ponens get us C. And suddenly we're done with the proof. Now, for good measure, you should always check your work. It's also good practice with the rules, especially if you're still not quite sure about the rules. Make sure that you look over and check that you understand how line 5 is a use of DS on lines 2 and 3, so on and so forth. But in order to keep this video relatively short, I'm just going to leave it at this.